My neighbor stole my shoveled parking spot. He didn't know he parked in front of a fire hydrant. I watched the red taillights of the tow truck fade into the swirling white void of the blizzard, dragging $80,000 of British engineering behind it like a dead sled dog. The crunch of the tires on the fresh powder was the only sound left on the street, that and the wind howling between the brownstones. Across the street, standing in one slipper and one bare foot, my neighbor Todd looked like he was watching his own funeral. He was trembling, and it wasn't just from the cold. It was the realization that his arrogance had just cost him a transmission, a $300 ticket, and his dignity. I took a sip of my hot cocoa, standing in my dark living room window, and raised the mug in a silent toast. He saw me. He definitely saw me. And for the first time in the 3 years we've lived next to each other, Todd didn't have a damn thing to say. To understand why I felt zero guilt watching a grown man cry in the snow, you have to understand the unwritten laws of a Chicago winter. When the hawk comes off the lake and buries the city in 2 feet of concrete-heavy slush, civilization breaks down. We revert to a primitive state. It's every man for himself, except for one sacred rule, the rule of dibs. If you shovel it, you own it. The storm hit yesterday afternoon. It was a monster. The weatherman called it a historic event, which is code for, your back is going to feel like broken glass tomorrow. By 5 p.m., the plows had boxed every car on the street in with a 4-foot wall of ice and road sludge. I spent 2 hours out there. My shovel was a cheap plastic thing that bent every time I hit the ice layer, so I had to use a metal garden spade to chip away at the glacier encasing my Honda Civic. My lungs burned from the freezing air. My beard was caked in icicles. My fingers were numb inside my gloves. But I did it. I cleared a pristine, 10x8 rectangle of asphalt. It was a thing of beauty. A sanctuary in the chaos. I moved my car slightly to make sure the edges were clean, then I realized I was out of rock salt and milk. I needed to make a run to the Jewel-Osco before the roads got completely impassable. This is the moment of truth in any snowstorm. You have to leave the spot you just broke your spine creating. I went to the garage and grabbed the chair. Everyone has one. Mine is a rusted, metal folding chair from the 1980s with a faded bull's sticker on the back. It's ugly, it's heavy, and it sends a clear message: I bled for this spot. Do not touch. I placed the chair dead center in the cleared space. I even piled a little snow on the legs so the wind wouldn't blow it over. I looked at it one last time, satisfied that the International Treaty of Parking Rights was in effect, and drove off. The trip took 40 minutes. The roads were a disaster, just endless lines of cars spinning their wheels and sliding through intersections. I got my milk, my eggs, and a 40-pound bag of salt. I was fantasizing about a hot shower and a whiskey. I turned onto my street. My headlights cut through the falling snow, scanning for my driveway. And then I saw it. A massive, white Range Rover. It was gleaming under the streetlights, looking like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. And it was parked in my spot. My stomach dropped. I hit the brakes, sliding a little as I came to a stop parallel to the SUV. I looked for the chair. Maybe he moved it to the side. Maybe he didn't see it. No. My chair was gone. I scanned the area and saw it 10 feet away, thrown violently atop a massive snowbank. It looked like a broken toy. He hadn't just moved it, he'd launched it. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a physical pressure building behind my eyes. This wasn't just a stolen spot. This was a declaration of war. I looked up at the house directly across from the spot. Todd's house. The lights were on in the living room. And there he was. Todd. He was standing in the bay window, holding a glass of wine. He was wearing a beige cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. He saw me idling in the street. He saw me looking at his car, then at my chair, then at him. He didn't hide. He didn't look ashamed. He smiled. A slow, greasy smirk. Then, he raised his free hand and gave me a little wave. Not a friendly wave. A shooing motion. Move along, peasant. He tapped his wrist, mouthing something that looked a lot like, too bad. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I wanted to get out. I wanted to pound on his door and scream until the police came. I wanted to key his pristine white paint job. But I didn't. Because as I stared at his bumper, sitting perfectly aligned with the curb I had painstakingly cleared, I noticed something. The snow was piled 5 feet high on the curb, masking everything. The plows had pushed a mountain of sludge onto the sidewalk. To the untrained eye, to Todd's eye, it was just a parking spot. But I've lived in this house for 10 years. I know every crack in the sidewalk. I know where the sewer grate is. And I know exactly what sits 3 feet to the left of my driveway. A fire hydrant. The hydrant was completely buried. You couldn't see a speck of yellow paint. It was entombed under a week's worth of plow debris. But I knew it was there. And more importantly, I had cleared the snow around the area where the hydrant would be accessible if the snowbank wasn't there. Technically, my spot was the illegal buffer zone for that hydrant. I sat in my idling car, the rage slowly cooling into something much sharper. Something icy and calculating. If I called the police, they wouldn't come. It's a blizzard. They have real emergencies. A parking dispute is priority 0. They'd tell me to file a report online and hang up. But the fire department? The fire marshal? They take their job very, very seriously. Especially in this weather. A blocked hydrant in a dense neighborhood during a storm is a catastrophe waiting to happen. I put my car in drive and crawled down the street. I had to park 3 blocks away, wedging my Civic into a questionable spot near an alley. I trudged back through the wind, carrying my groceries, head down against the biting cold. When I walked past the Range Rover, I paused. I looked at the window. Todd was gone, probably sitting by his fire, enjoying his wine, laughing about the guy he just screwed over. I went inside my house, didn't even take off my coat. I pulled out my phone and looked up the direct line for the local fire safety enforcement office, not 911. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Fire safety, Lieutenant Miller. Hi, I need to report a severe safety hazard, I said, keeping my voice level, concerned. I'm on 4th Street. There's a vehicle blocking the fire hydrant completely. With this storm and the wood frame houses on this block, I'm really worried if something happens, the trucks won't be able to connect. Address? Miller asked. The tone of his voice shifted instantly from bored to alert. I gave him the address. Is the hydrant visible? No, sir, it's buried under the snowbank, but I know it's there. The driver parked right in the clearance zone. There's 0 access. We have a zero-tolerance policy during snow emergencies, Miller said. I have a unit 2 streets over clearing access points. I'm sending them now. Thank you, Lieutenant. I hung up and went to the kitchen. I put the milk away. I poured myself that whiskey. Then I dragged a dining chair over to the front window, turned off all the lights in the living room, and sat down to watch the show. 10 minutes passed. The snow was falling harder now, thick sheets of white erasing the world. Then, through the swirling flakes, I saw lights. Not the flashing blue of the cops, but the distinct, urgent red rotation of a fire department SUV. It pulled up slowly and stopped directly behind the Range Rover. A large man in a heavy turnout coat got out. He was holding a massive flashlight. He walked up to the snowbank, kicked at it a few times, and uncovered the yellow cap of the hydrant. He shook his head. I could see him muttering to himself. He pulled out a pad. He wrote a ticket. He slapped it on the windshield. But he didn't get back in the truck. He reached for his radio. I leaned forward. Yes. In Chicago, if you block a hydrant, it's a ticket. If you block a hydrant during a snow emergency, you are an obstruction to public safety. They don't just ticket you. They remove the obstacle. The fire marshal stood there, waiting. He looked annoyed. He paced back and forth, shining his light into the Range Rover's windows. 5 minutes later, a rumble shook the street. It was louder than the wind. A massive flatbed tow truck turned the corner, its diesel engine clattering like a machine gun. Wait. It gets worse. The street was narrow. The snowbanks on both sides squeezed the lane down to a single car width. The flatbed couldn't maneuver. He tried to angle in front of the Range Rover, but there wasn't enough room to drop the bed and line up the wheels. The driver hopped out. He and the fire marshal had a quick conversation. The driver pointed to the back of his truck. The fire marshal nodded and gestured to the Range Rover like, "Get this thing out of here." The driver didn't reposition the truck. He walked to the back and unspooled the wheel lift, the old-school hook and bar system. My heart actually skipped a beat. The Range Rover is a permanent four-wheel drive vehicle. You cannot tow it with two wheels on the ground. It destroys the differential. It shreds the transmission. It is mechanical murder. The driver didn't care. He backed up, the reverse beeper echoing off the houses. Beep. 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 That sound must have finally pierced the cashmere bubble of Todd's living room. The front door of the house across the street flew open. Todd ran out. He wasn't wearing a coat. He was in silk pajamas and slippers. He hit the bottom of his icy steps and slipped, flailing his arms like a cartoon character, barely catching himself on the railing. "Hey! Hui!" he screamed. The wind tore the words away, but I could hear the panic. He sprinted into the street, waving his arms. "What are you doing? That's my car. You can't touch that." The fire marshal stepped in between Todd and the tow truck. He was a big guy, wider than Todd was tall. He didn't look impressed by the pajamas. "Step back, sir," the marshal boomed. "You're stealing my car." Todd yelled, his teeth chattering audibly. "I live right here. I'll move it. Just let me move it." "Vehicle is cited for blocking a hydrant in a snow emergency," the marshal said. "It's already been called in. It goes to the impound." "You can't do that." Todd tried to push past him. "Do you know how much this car costs?" "Sir, if you interfere with emergency operations, you will be arrested," the marshal said. His hand went to his belt. He wasn't playing. Todd froze. He looked at the tow truck. The driver had already hooked the rear wheels. The Range Rover was lifted at an awkward angle. "Wait!" Todd shrieked. "It's all-wheel drive. You can't tow it like that. You have to use a flatbed. You'll ruin the transmission." The tow driver looked up from his levers. He spat into the snow. "Street's too narrow for the bed, pal. Hazard has to be cleared. Boss says move it, I move it." "No, no, no. Let me get the keys. I'll drive it." Todd was pleading now. He looked small. The snow was soaking into his slippers. "Too late," the driver said. He pulled the lever. The winch groaned. The cables tightened. "Stop!" Todd screamed. The tow truck surged forward. Crunch. It was a sickening sound. The sound of expensive gears grinding against their will. The sound of metal snapping. The rear wheels were locked in the lift, but the front wheels dragged across the asphalt, fighting the rotation. The parking pole screamed. Todd put his hands on his head. He looked like he was going to vomit. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" The fire marshal handed Todd a carbon copy of the citation. "You can pick it up at the city lot." Bring proof of ownership and $300 for the violation. Tow fees are separate. You broke it. Todd yelled, tears actually forming in his eyes. You broke my car. You broke the law, the marshal said simply. He got back in his SUV. The tow truck roared, dragging the carcass of the Range Rover down the street. The screeching of the tires against the pavement was music. Horrible, expensive music. Todd stood alone in the middle of the street. The snow was piling up on his shoulders. He was shivering violently. He looked at the empty spot. He looked at the hydrant cap that was now barely visible in the tread marks his car had left. He turned slowly and looked at my house. He knew. He had to know. I was still standing in the window. I didn't hide. I took another sip of cocoa. I made eye contact. And then, I raised my hand. I waved. A slow, deliberate wave. I tapped my wrist. Too bad. Todd stared at me for a solid 10 seconds. His face was a mask of pure misery. He didn't yell. He didn't flip me off. He just slumped. The fight had left him. He turned around and walked back to his house, looking like an old man, defeated by the elements and his own stupidity. I watched until his door closed. Then I went to the kitchen and rinsed my mug. The next morning, the street was quiet. The sun was out, blindingly bright off the snow. I walked out to my car, parked 3 blocks away, and drove it back to the front of my house. The spot was empty. The hydrant was exposed now, thanks to the fire marshal's boot. I parked my Civic legally, 5 feet back from the pump, claiming the space I had earned. I saw Todd a few days later. He was getting into an Uber. His driveway was empty. The Range Rover hasn't been back. Rumor in the neighborhood is that the transmission was toast and the differential was cracked. The repair bill is hovering somewhere around $12,000, and his insurance is fighting it because the damage occurred during the commission of a parking violation. He saw me shoveling the walk. He didn't wave. He didn't even look at me. He just kept his head down and got in the back seat. Some people say the dibs system is petty. They say it's uncivilized. They say we should all just share the road. But those people have never spent 2 hours breaking ice with a garden spade only to have a guy in a heated luxury tank steal their hard work. So, am I the monster for calling in the cavalry and watching his car get destroyed, or did he get exactly what he deserved for breaking the sacred law of the snow?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications, so you may never miss another story like this.